Okay, so now I'm live. It's a little bit dark in here today, but I'm sure you'll get over it pretty quickly. Plus, you can just not watch the video because it's just me talking and you know what I look like. I want to talk about the topic of anxiety, which I've talked about a million times before, and put some new thoughts into some old thoughts and hopefully put something together that's succinct and has some kind of meaning for people who are dealing with anxiety. I don't like the word anxiety. I think it's a mislabeling of a different phenomena. And I think, as I've said before, I think learned fear is a better term for what most people who either self identify or get diagnosed with anxiety are dealing with. I also don't think it really matters in terms of how we label things these days because people feel shit. And I think that's an important thing to look at. But for the sake of defining things, I think learned fear is a better definition. I've spoken before that I think the cure for depression is a combination of activation and momentum. And that just makes something very complex sound very simple. It's not that easy to actually fulfill those things. But I do think for most men that solves the problem. It literally is the cure for depression is being more activated neurologically and physically, and then be moving towards a goal, but already be a few steps down the line. Easier said than done, right? But when it comes to anxiety, I think one of the most difficult things that men are dealing with these days is not realizing. And when I'm talking about this, I'm more talking about guys like younger guys, like 30 and under, maybe 35 and under, who are afraid of the world. And they're afraid often for good reason. And I think a lot of the time, the underlying factor for their fear has less to do with the trauma itself that they maybe haven't integrated or identify with, and might have more to do with the underlying biological inadequacies to correctly integrate and handle challenge, adversity, and trauma, i.e., low testosterone, as well as the consequences of developing and living a life in a hypergonadal state, particularly during developmental years. I think that a lot of the younger guys coming up are peaking with geriatric testosterone levels. And not only is this forming their identities, it's also drastically shifting the trajectory of where they end up. When you're a teenage boy or you're an adolescent man, and I don't think that 20-year-olds are men, but let's just call that an adolescent man. I think you're just a teenager at that stage who can drink and drive. Again, hopefully not together. That's the point of your life where you're meant to be fearless and taking on the world. That's the point of your life where typically we characterize these men as reckless, taking risks, driving too fast. I don't see much of that. I see guys coming up who are avoidant. I see men leaning more into video games than going outside because I think video games scratch the itch of competition and war, but don't actually require the same level of physical exertion or risk or vulnerability as actually going out and being your own action hero, we'll say. I think a lot of guys resort to video games and pornography not because they prefer these things, but because that is a way of stimulating themselves with less risk. And I think one of the challenging things that guys are coming up with is the self-awareness of getting into your 20s or maybe even into your 30s and realizing that you're not the man that you could be and that you should be, particularly when you are maybe doing everything right and you're just not responding the way you should. And you've got this constant underlying agitation internally where you are afraid of the men around you, you're afraid of the world, and you're not in a position where you can actually overcome adversity and overcome risk and build competence in the areas that you need to be actually become brave. The point of this video is I think bravery is the cure for anxiety. And I think consistently doing things that require bravery will therefore translate into the things that generate fear. And I think that's the best way to look at it, because when someone tells me they're anxious, I say, well, what are you anxious about? Like, I don't know everything. I just feel anxious all the time. I say, well, that's not anxiety. If I say I'm going to come and punch you in the face in an hour, you're going to be anxious for the next hour, and you're going to progressively get more anxious over the course of the hour. Now, you might be less anxious if you could hit me back. Maybe I shouldn't be hitting you if that's the case. But the point remains that if there's the absence of an acute stressor, I think that a chronic state of learned fear is a better way to look at this. And I think it's very difficult for guys to sit there and go, okay, well, I need to overcome my anxiety, but I'm not anxious about anything in particular. I'm anxious about everything. I've always got this baseline state of chronic fear and this chronic, stress going on. And I think that comes from a variety of factors. And, if we're looking at, I'm anxious about this, I'm anxious about that, exposure therapy works really well. But if you're perpetually anxious about going outside and it doesn't get better, it just gets worse over time, I think we've got a biological issue as well as a psychological issue. And I think we've got a psychological issue that can't be fixed with a broken biological foundation. And I think that the fixes that we give guys for the broken physiological, biological foundation are fucking terrible. Benzodiazepines might make you feel better at the time because you disassociate and numb yourself to the reality of the world. But when that shit wears off, you're going to have a rebound and you're going to be right back to square one. You can't walk on crutches your whole life, especially when the crutches are neurotoxic over time. It's a horrible, horrible way of doing things. So I don't think testosterone is the cure for everything, but I think it's a better intervention than most things when it comes to guys not doing well. And one thing that I see come up a lot when it comes to TRT and learned fear or anxiety or whatever the fuck you want to call it, I really couldn't care less, is this expectation that the injection of testosterone and by association, the higher amount of circulating androgens is going to turn you into a brave and courageous man who will overcome his fear of the world. And I don't think that that's a realistic expectation, but I think TRT has the capacity to allow men to achieve that. It's just that you have to understand how to apply it. And I think that the work that you can do on TRT acts as a multiplier for the effects of testosterone. And I think that's the most important way that we need to look at this, is going, okay, maybe the trajectory of my life was off track because I developed with the testosterone levels of an 80-year-old. And this made me more avoidant, more procrastinating. It influenced my behavior and disposed me, or gave me a predisposition rather, towards not really doing the things that maybe I could have done or should have done to be the man that I want to be now that I'm 30 or 35 or 40 or wherever you're at. Going, okay, accepting that that's what is. So we can fix the testosterone, but we don't have a time machine. So we have to play the ball where it lands. But we also need to understand that just fixing the testosterone is not going to make you the version of yourself that you would have been if you'd had the higher testosterone all along. And I think that's a disconnection between expectations from reality of treatment, is that the TRT is not going to undo everything prior. It's not going to hit the reset button. You're not going to wake up Giga Chad the next day just because you have the same testosterone levels as him. You're just going to wake up the version of you with exogenously higher testosterone levels than you've had before. And now you've kind of got to find your way in terms of being like, well, what the fuck do I do with this? And how do I actually fix my problems? How do I improve my subjective experience of being alive? And how do I solve these issues rather than expecting them to solve themselves? Because they don't. And if they did, I wouldn't be making this video. And if I did, I wouldn't have clients, because a lot of the time, guys will get 2, 3, 4 years into their TRT and go, this didn't make me the man that I thought it would be. This didn't fix the problems that I thought it would fix. And it's because they didn't put the testosterone to work. They didn't do the things that needed to be done that would now be successful because the foundation is in place for them to work properly. So, what we've got to do, I think, is cultivate bravery and courage. And I don't mean them in like cliche movie fictional ways. I mean genuine bravery and courage. And I think that there are so many things that we can do by exerting our willpower and breaking our default mode network and making the choice to go, I am going to do these habits. I am going to do these things every day, every week, every month, whatever, because I understand that these are going to be levels of discomfort and adversity that I can program into my life, that I can put in short bouts of acute stresses that are going to, as a process, inevitably make me more resilient just from doing it. And I think that these things are quite accessible and quite easy, but I think we need to understand the value of doing them and doing them consistently to achieve the outcome. Otherwise, we're not going to do them. And I think there's a bunch of different ways to skin a cat. I like that analogy. And I don't think what works for one person is going to work for everyone, but I think there's such a big toolbox that you can just try everything. You can throw a bunch of shit at the wall and see what sticks and then do that. And I think that what works for you and what works for me and what worked for someone else might all be different things. But at the end of the day, you need to do what you're going to do consistently and you need to consistently do it because it's just compliance. I think martial arts is the best thing you can do. I like to say that the most valuable martial arts session is the second one because the first time you didn't know what you were getting into, and then the second time you went back. I think it takes much more bravery and courage to go back the second time. The first time you don't really know what you're doing. And I think you should do whichever form of martial arts you have the best coach available in. You could argue the benefit of each martial art for whatever application, but find the one with the best coach and do that. I think the value of that is that you're getting into the physical body and outside of your mind. And I think a lot of the time, people who are anxious or people who have mood disorders in general are far too fixated on how they feel. And I think forcing yourself into the body and forcing yourself to learn to retain control and not lose your shit in a situation that feels physically confronting and uncomfortable for a short period of time with someone who is going to physically push you outside your comfort zone and might even inflict a little bit of pain on you, but is ultimately going to be able to keep you safe and is going to guide you and teach you combat, I think is very valuable. I think just walking down the street and having some degree of physical capacity for taking care of yourself and the people that you care about, even if it's just knowing how to throw a basic punch, I think that translates hugely into how you see yourself compared to the world around you. And I think a lot of the time when younger men are coming up hypergonadal, they smell the pheromones of the men around them and they can just size themselves up against the other guys and go, yeah, I'm a lesser man. And as a result, I'm afraid of the men around me and I don't have the competence and capacity that they have. And I think that that means that you probably should be afraid of the world because the world's real and the world's hard. So I think that's one way that we can start to work to fight back against what people would call anxiety. I think the other part that I've spoken about before in terms of the yin and yang is learning mindfulness meditation. And I think learning to rein in your stress response is super important. At the end of the day, and I'm just going to quote people who are way smarter than me. Jocko Willink says that he's got a quote. I'm going to butcher it, but he says that people who he knew who were fearless, it wasn't that they were fearless; it's that they overcame their fears. If you are truly fearless, then you'll get yourself killed. You're a dumbass. You're supposed to be afraid. Like, you're not supposed to walk out on the freeway in front of cars. You're supposed to be afraid of fast moving vehicles. You're supposed to have fear of dying, but you're also in situations day to day where you need to overcome that fear. And learning to manage your stress response, learning to be in a situation and going, okay, I feel fear, I feel stressed, I feel overwhelmed, but I need to do this, or I want to do this. And I want to do it more than the discomfort it's going to cause me. And that's what mindfulness is. It's not reacting to your emotions. It's learning to put your emotions aside and exerting your willpower. And I think that's a really important skill that you need to have. I think there are other things that you can do that are just micro adversities that you can program in. And I think that sitting down and looking at your to-do list and just getting through that and just choosing to go, I don't want to do these things. I don't want to do the work that I don't want to do that I need to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. That does take some degree of bravery and courage. I like how Alex Hormozy says that, and he said this in a recent podcast, was that a lot of people aren't afraid of failing. They're afraid of people seeing them fail. And I think that that's very true. However, I think that if you can cultivate enough pride in yourself from giving yourself credit where credit's due, but then also earning that credit, I think at the end of the day, you become less impacted by what other people think because you can cultivate that confidence and you can cultivate that approval yourself based on your habits and your actions. And I think that it's very difficult to be in a state of perpetual anxiety and learned fear at the same time as being proud of yourself. I don't think that they can coexist. I think that you can still be anxious about stuff, particularly if you're pushing outside your comfort zone. I think that that's not a bad thing. But to get to the point that it's debilitating and it's ruining your life, I think it's hard to do that if you're someone that you're proud to be. But I also think it's hard to be someone that you're proud of if you don't have a track record of being brave and courageous. And I think it's very difficult to be brave and courageous if you've gone through your entire life hypergonadal. But increasing your testosterone levels is not going to inherently make you adopt masculine traits. It's not, it's simply not. It might dispose you towards maybe leaning into them a bit more, or maybe wanting to do a bit more stuff. Effort feels a bit better. Things feel a little bit less stressful day to day. Cool. But it's not going to get you up off the couch and make you do those things. And it's not going to help to program you to understand the value of doing these things and doing them consistently to get to where you need to go. So I think to summarize, I think if you've started testosterone and you're understanding that a lot of the anxiety that you're dealing with was not directly just as a result of your hypogonadism, but your hypogonadism was a contributing factor to how you became anxious and afraid all the time. Especially if it's this idiopathic anxiety that's just, generalized anxiety or social anxiety. It's just everything, just, you're more edgy and you're more afraid of everything that you should be, and you're just highly strung and anxious all the time. I think rather than focusing on that feeling and focusing on how that's getting in your way is finding aspects and elements of your life that you can lean into that discomfort, and then you can continue to progressively overload your comfort zone. And just like if you're squatting, if your max is 100 kilos on squat, you don't put 140 on the bar. That's how you hurt yourself. If you've never done martial arts before, you don't sign up to do a professional fight. It's too much. You're gonna get hurt. You are definitely gonna get hurt. But if going out for a walk for an hour a day is something that makes you anxious and you can overcome that, that's a win. You haven't won the battle. Also, you haven't won the war, you've won the battle. But then the next day you can edge that comfort zone further. And it doesn't have to be something where every day you push it. You can push it every week. You can push it every month. I mean, some people are further off track than others. But finding areas of life that you can lean into discomfort a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more to push your comfort zone is going to expand your overall comfort zone in all areas, particularly if you're getting overwhelmed by little things. If you get overwhelmed by doing your chores and making your bed and eating the right food, or driving your car to work, or having basic social interactions, or ordering food at the counter, if those things make you anxious, I think exposure therapy to other forms of stresses that you can overcome by association will make those things much less stressful. And I think having the optimal testosterone levels at the foundation is going to allow your body and your brain and your psychology and your neurotransmitters and your stress hormones and that entire cascade of all the internal operatings of your body and your brain to respond the way that they always should have. But now you have to retrain yourself to make those things work for you. And I think that's the part that we don't do, is we don't realize that now that the testosterone levels are optimal, we need to retrain ourselves to become the men that we want to be. And at the end of the day, I think that that can be broken down into a series of positive habits which push our comfort zone and which make us more comfortable in spaces that we would usually be uncomfortable. And I think that over time, that allows us to overcome our fears, not become fearless, but overcome our fears, to be more brave, to be more courageous, and then ultimately to be someone that we're proud of.